Yeah, but I heard in the note, in the not in the note, sorry, in the lecture, he was saying that nothing that remains from his text was for the general public. So he may have had books for the general public, but they're not in
Yeah,
existence, right?
yeah, there's a good chance. Yeah, you
Yeah.
had dialogues too. That's known, but there's like one part of one remaining. We don't even have a full dialogue. So we like to do creative writing too, like Plato,
Wow.
which may have been for the public, because that's like telling stories. Because Plato used a lot of stories and myths to make his points.
Yeah, it's funny. Leonard described, if Plato tells a myth, it means that uh, he wants to say something, but he doesn't quite know how to say it. And he wants you to take it seriously, but not literally. Like the myth of the demiurge. And
Yeah, I'm
so,
never
yeah,
quite sure with Plato.
yeah,
Plato's just so weird. It's like Socrates speaks for him. So when is it Plato? When is it Socrates? What's the difference?
right.
Seems like they're the same thing. It's
I
like
get
his
a lot.
alter ego.
I have a lot of questions about Plato, which we'll get to at some point as well.
Yeah.
So, I also wanted to ask you. He said this makes sense to me because I asked you this question, and this question came up actually twice in different ways, but it was essentially the same question, and it was about Aristotle's popularity.
Yeah.
And he said in the later, so in the earlier lectures, I think that he said that, okay, you have Aristotle and he's invented all these new concepts, but he's mixed, and it's not all, like, his whole body of text is not all consistent versus, say, Kant, who is ruthlessly consistent throughout his text. And so he said the system builder who is most consistent is going to win. And so that was one reason he gave for Aristotle's lack of popularity. And I think he gave a few other examples, but Kant is what stood out with this ruthless consistency. And then he said later as well in the lectures on ethics that really when it comes to general popularity of a philosophy, and like if it's adopted by the man in the street, to use that expression, it's about the ethics. And Aristotle had what he described as like a combustion engine that wasn't quite working. Whereas, Plato offered, if you offer a magic carpet or if you offer a horse and cart, like if it works, it works. People will go for that. They're not going to go for something that's not working. And so because his ethics was sort of geared towards nobles, not people who were working in the field or something like that, it never caught on. And obviously he also said that, there were issues. He wasn't a moralist, so there were a lot of inconsistencies, like it wasn't compared to his metaphysics and epistemology. And so he gave that as the reason for why Aristotle just didn't catch on as much as Plato or a Platonic philosopher.
Well, I think it's just, I don't know why it didn't catch on. I mean, I know it wasn't even initially the most popular. It's not like it took the world by storm and it never did. I think Plato had an edge always. I don't know why, but it might be that the world generally started more mystical. So there's a lot more barriers to go by
Right.
to get through.
Yeah.
And then because of that, but people put less effort into preserving Aristotle because that could have
Right.
preserved a consistency,
Right.
or his inconsistencies would be easier to explain because you could explain a contradiction if you had all the information, all the relevant statements. But if you
Oh,
don't preserve
okay.
it, then
Yes. Right.
what does
Right.
it matter? Like, so even if Kant, I mean, imagine you just took Kant, but obliterated half his text. I mean, it wouldn't catch on as well because
Right.
it's not as much there,
Right.
but it's newer. So more is available anyway. Aristotle is 2,300 years old. A lot of it's just gone. Doesn't matter how much you wish you had it. It's just not preserved. So there's no way it could catch on because it doesn't exist. Just all that can catch on is what you see.
And part of the reason it doesn't exist, I'm speculating because I don't know, I assume is because of the Christians, right? And they had that, they burnt all of, I don't know, there was like a library they burnt in Egypt, and their reasoning was, well, if it's not in the Bible, like everything is in the Bible, so we don't need it. So if it isn't heathen or whatever, we can burn it because it's irrelevant. All the answers we
Yeah.
need are in the Bible. But if it isn't in the Bible and it's heathen, then we should burn it. So regardless, we should burn it.
Yeah, so the
And
Greeks
so,
were often a victim anyway. Even Plato was to an extent a victim of that.
oh, okay, I see. Okay,
I mean, they didn't.
right.
He was still a pagan, still a heathen.
Yeah, okay. The Greek interest in history. I think you mentioned that earlier because I wrote this down when you were talking. Did they have an interest in history like the Greeks? Like they had, wasn't the first historian Greek, Thucydides or something like that? Is it Thucydides? I don't know.
Herodotus.
Herodotus, yeah. Do you know why they were interested in history? Was it
I
Aristotle
don't
interested?
remember.
You don't know?
Not really. I don't think
Yeah.
there's a political history, but that's it.
Yeah, okay. Right.
There is a book about Christians burning a library. It's about Hypatia. I forget the name of the movie. And she's a
I know.
Platonist.
Right.
She tries to prevent the burning of all these books. It's a pretty good movie.
Okay.
It's about this subject.
I've heard of it. I've heard of her. She was like astronomer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Platonic, but still.
Yeah.
Still cared about reason and tried to fight back.
Yeah. You said, I think before, the field's now multifaceted, and I think I remember the word in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, was multidisciplinary. That's like a popular thing now.
Yes.
And so so obviously you can't be a universalist today. You can't be a Da Vinci and study everything, or you can't be an Aristotle and be like an inventor in every field. But then what about approaching everything in terms of fundamentals in do you think that's something that can be strived for? Like learn physics, learn chemistry, learn biology, but learn the big ideas. You're not looking to go to the cutting edge of the field and come up with some new concept. You're looking to just grasp the big ideas of each field.
That's generally what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I do select, like I still don't know much about chemistry and not too much about physics, but beyond that, I know enough principles of reasoning that do the job. And that's what philosophy does.
Yeah.
And I could be multidisciplinary. Within psychology, I know enough about linguistics, AI. I know enough about epistemology, philosophy, and computer science just to say things, to comprehend enough so that I might not create new ideas, but I can get the fundamentals and I can work on fundamental problems or work on my particular field, which is psychology.
Because I remember reading somewhere that there were mathematical methods developed in physics or even in psychology. I can't remember what field, but they were developed in physics, and they then found they were statistical methods, and then it was found that they were usable in other fields. And so there's a lot of like cross-pollination that I assume, if you know big ideas, would be really helpful. But one example even that comes to mind is object-oriented programming and Rand's theory of concepts. If you grasp Rand's theory of concepts, then I've heard that object-oriented programming is difficult to grasp, but if you've spent time thinking about the theory of concepts, it's not, at least in the abstract, it's not difficult to grasp.
I think so, yeah.
You mentioned linguistics. Do you know where that field came from? Like it's different from grammar, right? It includes grammar, basically.
Yeah, it's like the study of the way languages are structured and why they're made the way they are. Like, why does it have a certain syntax? How do you understand what somebody else is even saying? What does it mean to say you've learned a language as opposed to able to repeat some words? Like, what's the difference?
Right.
Or it's even about like your order of learning things.
Right. And so that's sort of related to philosophy and psychology, it sounds like.
yeah, it gets into epistemology, I
Right.
think, or
Okay.
psychology. Those usually goes one of those two ways.
And so you find whenever you get into or read about one of these new fields, there is like a significant amount of overlap in terms of other things you've studied before. And then you like, you'll get onto linguistics and you're like, oh, okay, this and this and this, I already understand. And now what's this that's unique? It's sort of like, what's the analogy? Okay, I thought about this analogy. Tell me if you think it's okay. Um, like if I'm studying philosophy, for example, if I'm studying linguistics or trying to learn any new field, then it's not like I necessarily have to learn everything from scratch. Like you see a car, and if you see a new car and it's a little bit different, it doesn't mean you're like, oh, what is a wheel? What is an engine? What is a bonnet? Like there's certain fundamentals that you're like, oh, okay, wheels, engine, interior, and then it's like, okay, but what's unique about this car? So you're just left with that as opposed to doing everything from scratch. Do you have that
Yeah.
experience? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I get that from philosophy, that way of
Right.
is the questions you ask. I think even Aristotle, you can think of in a way as presenting essential questions, even states them in posterior analytics. Like, what questions do you need to ask to understand something?
Right.
And what kind of attributes exist in the world? So it's like first principles. And then you could distinguish some basic questions that get at the heart of things.
Right, that was the philosopher's inventory, where he's like looked at the attributes of different entities and tried to come up with an inventory of all of them, right?
Yeah, it's not even that complicated. I have
Yeah.
pretty common sense.
Yeah.
It's like the 4 or 5 W's, like I've told you, and
Yes.
a few more. I mean, they even translate to what, why, and things like that in Greek.
I remember them.
It doesn't even, I mean, it's not even like place, it is where. So it is the W's, literally speaking.
Quality, quantity, relationship, action. I think those were the ones I remember.
Yeah, those are different. But then there's the what, and there's the why.
Oh, the teleology.
where.
I listened to that.
And
yes,
where.
and the four causes. Yes.
Yeah.
What about one thing I'm experiencing, especially with these history of philosophy lectures, is and history, I think, as a subject, which I've been reading about, is like it's one difference that is I see as problematic is that it seems like there's often more memorization, whereas in, say, if you studied maths or physics, like yes, you have to memorize a concept, but there's a lot of application, and so you get the chance to apply it and practice it constantly, whereas in history it's kind of just like a wall of facts. And then in philosophy, in the history of philosophy especially, that it feels like it is a bit like that. It's hard to get to the point where it's like, okay, here's the idea, how'd you get there? All right, let me practice applying this 10 times. Like there's not really any of that in philosophy and history, which makes it very
No.
it makes it too easy to just, it's like you're just looking at facts and then you just forget them.
Yeah. But yeah, there's ways to apply it. Like, I do think reading the story is a good example of one thing to make Plato a bit more understandable, or just what is he? Yeah, it gives you a context. And I do think there is a lot of learning by doing. I think even still with philosophy, you need to like pick different sort of things. Like we've read stories, we've go through your questions, talk about history. Sometimes that could be a matter of I'm trying to think, finding examples usually of just applying this thinking.
Right.
It doesn't even need to be focused on bringing in the philosophy as much as to figure something out. You're necessarily going to use philosophy. You can't avoid doing it in a way. And the things you've learned, you'll necessarily use them. Or I could help remind you, of course, of which principles to use. Right. And I think that's a lot of what goes on.
Right.
At some point, you can't just, of course, just load up on facts. At some point, you just gotta like stop on facts and just do some practice
Right.
and go back and forth sometimes.
Yeah.
It is good to take a break sometimes and just think of other things, because then like read some fiction, or I don't know, do science if that's your job, or whatever your field is.
Yeah.
You could just like start working on it for like a few days
Yeah.
and see how you do things different, or realize where you're doing things better or where you might have issues. And then you could just think about your philosophy. How do I use what I learned to practice applying it and using it and expanding my thinking in effective ways, rather than just like, here's a rule, I use it, but here's a general rule and I could figure out what to do based on the principles.
Even so, with like with a general rule, even if you get a general rule, like you look at one of Plato's arguments for the existence of universals, that world of universals, like he's got the argument from perfection, and a few others which I've forgotten now, but you follow that line of reasoning, but then you'll just forget it. And it's like, okay, so what? It's basically the application is harder, whereas there's got to be an application, but it's more difficult because you've got to somehow find it yourself. Whereas in maths, it's all set up for you. It's like, okay, here's the concept, spend your time understanding it conceptually. Then we're going to give you all these puzzles to solve so you can see how it applies. Whereas in philosophy, there's less of like, there's no book that's like, here's all these puzzles, here's some examples, tell me what principles apply, right? It doesn't really exist. It's like, figure it out yourself. And same for history.
Yeah.
Like for history, there's even less, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking, what else could you
said
do?
you gave valid points and things I'm aware of, like read
Yeah.
fiction, try and apply, like what I went through Musashi with you, and we're trying to find principles. Remember, like
Yeah.
read fiction, try like do other things in parallel so you can see if applications come up. And that's all I got for now. But yeah, or like, yeah, I don't know, even if you read the news and then approach it from that perspective of like critical reading, or
Right.
even what is that book? The Art of Readings for Logical Analysis. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know the book, but I get the idea.
Yeah, it just gives articles, and then it asks you questions to prompt you to analyze it critically, which I assume is using philosophy, but there's no, anyway, that kind of thing. I think if you can find that, which is, there's not much of it, but I guess that would be it. So
Yeah.
okay, should we get into
Yeah.
Babel?
Yep.
All right. So overall, I think I can see he's creating this it's like an alternate universe, and
Yes.
it's funny because you have all these people, like all these sects that are warring each other, and one person believes this about the books and another person believes something else. But the difficulty I had is that I felt like there were a lot of hints at like other things, maybe what other philosophers said. And I even looked it up, and there was like references to Kant. And I'm like, well, if you don't know any of that, it makes it there's a lot of passages where you're like, all right, I don't get what this is getting at. It's like, okay, there's a universe with infinite books. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's funny that there are all these librarians walking around in this universe, like jumping down the chutes and then but okay, so what? That was my experience, because and I thought it was because maybe I was missing the context for it.
I think in a way it's just the fiction of it. I mean, that these people are so into their theory that they'll die for it, even though it's literally all platonic and out there kind of. Really, the point of it is, what do you do when you can't to know things? It's all about knowledge. If all the knowledge is available, all of the knowledge in existence, And even all false statements exist. And if everything to be known is written down, how can you know anything? How do we know things if everything is there? Which in a way is just like reality. Everything could be known, and even everything like false could be said and believed. So how do you know anything? So how do you acquire that knowledge when everything is there?
When is this is it seems kind of similar to the detective story about Lenot. I
Yes.
forgot what was it
Yeah,
called?
yeah, the
But
compass.
yeah, the compass. And it's his way of getting knowledge is looking through all kinds of
Yeah,
esoteric books and finding patterns that relate to the crime scene. And it's
yeah.
because okay, so you're saying the question is, when everything is available, how do you know? What is your method for knowing?
Yeah.
There's no one, like, I don't know, maybe I can't remember, but what difference would it make if there were no books, or that the whole place was full of books? Like, if you can't know, I don't know, I need to think about that. um I'm just confused in, like, what's the difference, because there's no books now, so how do you know, versus there's a whole world filled with books, and they're all random anyway. That in this case, they're not even, like, there's no pattern to the book, so whatever book you find is just completely arbitrary. And so
Yeah.
how does that help you think about the question of how you know, as opposed to you live in a world where there's no books?
Well, you could think in one sense, could you have an over dedication in books that the books always have the truth? And like, why don't they write their own books? Why do they need to use all the existing books? I mean, in a way, it's like over reliance
Yeah,
on books.
why?
Like,
Why are they all reading? Why? That's a good question.
you don't just live in a library and learn. I mean, in a way, it's like criticizing. If you only exist in your mind, then every potential thing could exist. Every positive statement, every negative statement, every affirmation, every denial. If you exist only in your head, would you ever know the truth? I mean, now would you even have a way of validating the truth if you can have an idea that contradicts another idea, a contradiction of a contradiction? You go on forever. There's no way to validate. It's just all theory without reality.
And so these people in this story, I can't remember if there were, I think there were people who, like, went on pilgrimages and tried to find books,
Yeah, the true
and
book,
the
the
true
book with all
book.
the, but how would you know what the true book is? The legend, the key to all the other books. How would you even know? And how would you know it's not a book saying that this isn't the key, or that it is a key, but but it isn't just by like one typo, like things like that. In what way would you ever know that you found it? I mean, if it could say that it did, but just because it says it did doesn't mean it did, because it just says it. You can't know anything is true. It's just
The,
statements.
so all the characters in this, all these, like, people in this world of the library, all of them begin with an abstraction, and then well, actually, I guess you do that in reality too. You begin with an abstraction, then you go and search for it in reality, right? Like, it's like a
Sometimes.
hypothesis. You create a
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Yeah.
So they're not total. Well, I don't know. It is a bit arbitrary to say there is the book, but if the
Yeah. But
library is
that was a
infinite,
later. That
yeah.
was later in the story. Like, oh, nobody was sure that there was maybe a way to figure it out. They said, oh, we'll never know. And people just went about their business until one day somebody came up with a theory that you could find this absolute truth in a book. Then people went crazy and went searching. That could be like Christianity. You tell them that Jesus Christ is the savior, people start to go crazy.
There was
Everything
a.
changed.
I guess we can go through it. I've made highlights, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of highlights. But there were a couple of things that I thought were interesting, but I didn't quite. How did you visualize it, by the way? Because I was trying to visualize. Okay, there's a hexagon, and it seems like the shelves are on It said they're on 5, but they're like, I guess, halfway through
Yeah.
these other two. Maybe I can draw it. Yeah, I didn't quite. How were you visualizing it? Let me see if I can.
Stacked hexagons, like
Sorry?
little rooms, like apartment complex, just stacked hexagons, and each has a door to the next one. Like and like
Like this. So that, yeah.
in a small hallway to the next one at the point. That's how
So
I imagine it.
I'm drawing it now. 3 shelves, 4 shelves, and then I visualize that there's like half a shelf here and half a shelf here because there was some
Yeah.
small room or something he said, like
Yeah.
in these things.
The
And
bathroom.
then and then there's like a hallway here
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah. Or some
And then
arrangement of that.
something, and then the
Arrange them all like
stairwell
that.
is here.
I think that the stairwell was where in the hallway, I thought.
Oh, in the hallway.
That's how I thought of
Okay.
it.
Okay, well, close, something like that.
Like a
But
honey,
then, okay,
like a
but then you've
beehive.
like a beehive, yes, or the Roman columbrium, which is what Nietzsche was
Oh,
talking about.
I wonder if that is a reference to Nietzsche. Now that I say that,
Roman
that really could be.
columbrium.
That could be a Nietzsche reference.
Oh, really?
Think of
Oh,
it.
really? Yeah.
He's making fun of the Platonists, the ones who see this true reality. He's making fun of that. Borges is, and Nietzsche did too. I wonder. It might be
Well,
implicit, maybe an accidental, but I see the
yeah.
similarity.
Interesting. Okay, so there's one hallway, and then I was like, but if there's one hallway, then you only go to one other hexagon before you can move up and down. Like there's got to be two separate openings. You see what I mean?
Well, I don't know. I think you could just at the bottom half and the top half, there's walls, but there's a hole for a hallway on either side. I mean, the hole could be on 2 sides or one. Just depends on the shape.
All right.
It's not a big deal. It's just they all connect. It could be
Yeah,
half.
I was curious. Okay, so it really is. It's so in your case, you thought it was like literally wherever you go. Oh, you can just keep moving between hexagons on the same level, but you can also descend a level, and then below there's a bunch of hexagons.
Yeah.
Clear all. Okay, cool. Let's see what else is in here. Oh, what do you think this was where he talks about the mirror? Some of these are just like, they're not significant references, but I was like, what is he getting at? Yeah, I don't know
confused.
Oh, you were confused as well.
Yeah.
Okay. When he writes like this, is it usually a reference to some kind of philosophical view or something like that? Because it just seems so like, what the hell? Where is this coming from?
Could be Plato, or it could like the projection of the world of forms. I don't know. I don't think it's an important point.
Yeah. Yeah, it could actually that's a good point. It could be Plato. Yeah, but okay. Okay, so here actually I found this interesting. See, there are idealists.
Yes.
And they're arguing that the hexagonal halls are a necessary form of absolute space, or at least our intuition of space.
That's more
then
Kant than anything.
Okay.
The intuition of space. The idealists. Kant is an idealist. That sounds like something he might say, or some form of that. That are basic. Well, I don't want to quote, but I'm thinking like there's like his version of Aristotle's categories. Space is one of those.
Got it. So it was a reference. I couldn't quite make the distinction because I thought an idealist is a mystic, but I'm superimposing the
idealist is like Berkeley, Kant, some other
it.
Germans.
And then the mystics.
Not necessarily Kant. Not necessarily Kant, but yeah.
And the mystics would be those who came before Kant and Berkeley and those, and they're like, because they talk about this a great book that's continuous, got a continuous back circling all the room, which is bizarre.
Pythagoreans. Anyone like that?
Okay. Everything is made up of I don't know if I'm reading into this too much, but like the world is made
Well,
up
any
of this
mystic,
stuff.
or it's like, oh, we just look at. It could be Hinduism. It could be anything like anything is just in mystical revelation.
Yep.
That's all. Any religion.
Right. And the cyclical book is God. So there's like one big book, and it takes up the entire shelf, and it is
This super book.
Yep. And then okay, so he gets onto this and he starts talking about axioms.
Yeah.
What is he going on about? The library exists ab aeterno, which I think is eternally.
Exists forever.
Yeah.
It's always has existed.
And what is he getting at here? Like, I didn't see, there were a lot of references in here that I'm like, all right, what is he trying to say? I don't really know what he's getting at with this. He starts talking about the axioms of the library. Is it this?
Thinking like a mathematician, you always start with an axiom, and that you derive principles from that.
Right.
In a way, it could be rationalist because you're deducing the truths from axioms, which is kind of Platonic as well. It is a story about a Platonic person coming to understand this strange world of all pure books.
What did you make of this book that was composed of the letters of MCV perversely repeated from, then he goes on to say,
it was hilarious.
And there's like, oh, time your pyramids. And then he finds a book that says that.
It's like that thing you mentioned once where the Torah code, was it? Bible code?
Oh, the Bible code, yes.
It's just like that.
Right.
You see a number, it's like, oh my God, it means everything, but it's just arbitrary. It never was put there for a reason. It's just incidental.
Actually,
they're making a big deal of nothing.
There is some lady who advertised in HBL and she says she's cracked the code of Atlas Shrugged. It was very bizarre. And she said she found the mathematical codes that show Ayn Rand's true message. And let me just see if I'll put it up because it's kind of relevant it made me think of this book. Okay. Where is she? Maybe she was deleted. I think they got rid of her.
Probably.
Oh, no. I found it. Oh, it's called Atlas Decrypted if you want to look it up on your end. atlasdecrypted.com.
Yeah.
Everyone's just not attacking her, but they're saying, could you present some actual content? Otherwise, it seems like you have done to Atlas what Christians do with the Book of Revelation.
It's insane.
Yeah, she's just getting hammered all over. Okay, but yeah, same concept. So it says, you will understand essential concepts behind the plot line and never before shared details about the novel's protagonists who have fascinated readers for years, nearly 7 decades after publication. Okay, wait, but where does she say talk about? She's done doing a forensic, have driven scientist Christina Monkholm to dig deeper into the pages of this masterpiece and unearth a metaphor, a varied equation, crucial to solving one of the greatest literary mysteries of all time. It's similar to what he's getting at in this book, right?
Yeah, I think so. This is almost like the narrator of the story is like describing the history of a certain type of idealism, a certain philosophy system. And this is the consequences of that system, the basis of that system. And he's saying, so you got like, oh, this idea of a thing that has existed forever. We've got a system of symbols, and people argue about the meaning of those symbols. Could they mean anything? Are they special? Or are they just symbols of whatever we want? I mean, that's just two basic ideas about some philosophy, this made up philosophy.
And the people, they spend so long looking for codes in the books that they throw themselves down the stairwell of infinity, and their sepulcher is the wind. Is that sepulcher or whatever? Their
Seppuku, yeah.
not seppuku, sepulcher. I don't know how to say it. That Christian
Sepulchre.
word. Yeah, where
Oh,
you're like your grave.
oh,
Your
sepulchre.
grave is the
I think you're right,
great.
though.
Your grave is the
Yeah,
infinity of where you
yes,
decay in the winds of
yes.
infinity. So it kind of would, and it did say she spent the second dissertation of her life, but stretching on for decades. This is crazy. Did you go to the webpage?
I can't see it because I
Oh,
don't have access. I don't think.
okay. All right. I can. Anyway, it's a side point, but yeah. So it's very interesting that there's that link. She's doing that, and then,
Yeah,
like you said, the Bible code. Okay.
yeah. In a way, this is if you only had definitions, can you discover the truth from definitions? That's another kind of approach to this story.
Why is that? Why is that link? That's interesting.
I'm saying that because it's just things that are written down. It could be true or false. Nothing necessitates it being true. So it's like interpreting words. Can you find the truth just from defining things or just from saying things or reading things that other people said?
But with context, can't you do that? Like you've got, let's say you've got certain you've grasped the philosophical inventory of categories, and you know, like, okay, there's red, there's hard, you've like got some experience in the world, and then someone describes like a monster to you, or describes a whole bunch of different, like in a text. So you've got a larger context, a context that can give it like some kind of definition, that gives it some kind of proof, that gives it some kind of application. Like, isn't that possible?
Yeah, but not in this story. Notice in this
Mm,
story that they don't even talk about a world. It's just the hexagons, the library, and the books.
right.
We don't even know what's at the bottom. In a way, it's like there is no experience. They only exist in their mind. Can you ever discover the truth divorced from reality? Because in this world, all they have is words. But you need the real world. You need more than just words. This is what happens when you divorce the mind from the real world.
Hey, number 6 by the Pythagoreans is the first perfect number.
So there you go.
I wonder if
Maybe you got
it's
it. Could be. He was well read in philosophy, so it could be the case.
yeah, okay. There's probably a lot of links like that, right? The
Yeah, at least implicit.
yeah.
I probably would do it too, just because I know of them. It's just like it comes out naturally.
Okay. Uh yeah, so here we go. There's like this cult. Well, there's the superstition. So there are these people repudiating the superstition of seeking any sense in books, and compare it to looking for meaning in dreams or in the chaotic lines of one's
Yes.
hand. Is this the empiricists?
I don't know, but that seems like a good interpretation.
Okay, they say that the books themselves mean nothing. Do you know what he was getting at here with this thing about the dialectical? Like, what is he trying to say with this? Okay, there's people here that speak this language, and then there's to the right, there's a language is dialectical, and then 90 stories up, it's incomprehensible. First of all, what's a dialectical language? And then,
Um, Saying that language is about discussion, I think.
oh, okay,
I think in that context,
okay. So that like the concepts are all about discussion or something like that,
yes, usually,
right?
or understanding each other.
And then you've got people like just positing, okay, one letter influences the next. They're all like, their heads are in the
Yeah,
books, and they're making up all this stuff.
yes.
Um, okay, what about this? So he talked about some book some chief found a book, and through
Yeah.
combinational analysis, they
Yeah.
found that through I didn't quite get this. There was some combination analysis that they did,
Yeah.
and the examples made it possible for a librarian of genius to discover the fundamental law of the library, like
Yes.
the form of the good or something like that.
Yes.
This thinker observed that all the books, however diverse, are made up of uniform elements: the period, the comma, the space. What I'm trying to make a connection to what this is getting at. And then he adduced circumstance confirmed by all travelers. They are not in the whole vast library, two identical books. From all these incontrovertible premises, he deduced that the library is total and its shelves contain all possible combinations of the 20 odd orthographic
Yeah.
symbols. Yeah. What I know this is getting at, like, so some kind of philosophical thinking, but
He's just getting at that this guy with this analysis, which the details don't matter because, well, even Borges goes over that. It doesn't even mention. He discovered that it's not a particular language. There's just characters in it. And then he also figured out that no two books are the same. You just take it for granted that he discovered it. And from that, he deduced everything else, that all possible combinations can be expressed in any language. That's kind of like some theories in logical positivism, or like that's logical positivism in a way.
sorry, explain that again. I didn't quite understand. So
Logical
he's,
positivism.
yeah,
It's just a way of deducing everything from certain rules and symbols.
okay,
It's very mathematical.
yeah,
So it's saying like with these symbols, you can express anything in all languages, and you even can have all combinations of all symbols in these books. That's all he's saying.
right.
That everything exists in all books, and every possible contradiction also exists at the same time.
Oh, okay. I see so this is like what you mentioned earlier, where the books are like the mind, because you can have contradictions in the mind. And in this
Yes.
world, your books can be filled with contradictions. So then the
Yes.
question is, how do you know
Yeah.
what's true? That's the idea, right?
Yeah. One book could say literally the opposite of another book. Like one book could say that Jesus died on the cross. Another book could say Jesus did not die on the cross. Direct contradiction, but both books exist.
Yeah. And what's all this? Maybe this is a Christian reference of the vindications, the book of apology and prophecy, and then established a prodigious arcana for the future. And then he
It's a
talks
made up
about these
history, I
crazy
think.
pilgrims.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
probably related to Christianity.
Yeah.
But vindications is just a word you made up, like just for fun.
Okay.
Like, oh, you're giving this philosophy a name in
Got
this
it.
fiction. And now the pilgrims are dying for this. They want the super book.
Yeah, he talks about the inquisitors who are like, they're almost killed because there are staircases without steps, and then there are these people who walk around and try and get rid of books as well.
Yeah.
Those who said they're a blasphemous sect. What? Yeah, so I'm like, it just seems like this world is filled with crazy people. Like, there's no one person there's no one group of people that even seem reasonable. Like, see,
Right.
it just keeps on going on. Now there's like a blasphemous sect that suggested that all searches be given up and that men everywhere shuffle letters and symbols until they succeed in composing by means of improbable stroke of luck the canonical books. There's no one person that is normal here. Everyone is like crazy.
Well, their philosophy turned them all crazy. They all are unified by this Platonic philosophy. That's their
Right.
one unification. And that's causing all this insanity that they're fighting each other about their absolute truth. So it's a story also about like how history affects or how philosophy impacts people, as much as it's a story about how you acquire knowledge.
But yeah, it's hard to make the distinction between what philosophy he's speaking about. It just seems
Yeah,
like there are, for the most part, if you just sit back and don't have, I have some context of philosophy, but it just seems like, okay, this is a world where there's a lot of crazy people that
yeah,
they've got some kind of Platonic philosophy. It's not clear what, and they're all just making all these claims, and they're talking about a big round book, and they're talking about throwing books, and they're talking about rearranging letters. Like it's just a madhouse, throwing
yeah.
themselves down the stairs.
That's why this is good. It's not 100 pages. A
Right.
Borges is always very, very dense. But you could get a lot in a little. And for
Right.
that reason, I think it's helpful even if you have guidance through it,
Yeah.
because then you see the depth of the abstraction, or it's more like Plato's thought experiments. This gives you a context for reflecting on philosophy, even if you don't know all the references.
Right. Yeah, I'd be interested if I had like I'll be interested when I read it and I've gone through, let's say, the whole history of philosophy and see how much I pick up on as opposed to now. Because there are a
Yeah,
couple of things that I picked up on from Plato specifically, but otherwise, yeah, see, like again, okay, now there's someone who says, okay, in order to find the holy book, you do it regressively. There's you have to, okay, the holy book is at location A, so you have to go first to location B and then first consult location C and ad infinitum. And it's like, it just keeps going on and on about all these crazy people and their assertions. Um,
yeah.
okay, now there's this group, right? The impious assert that the absurdities of the norm in the library, that anything reasonable, even humble and pure coherence, is an almost miraculous exception. They speak of the febrile library, whose hazardous volumes run the constant risk of being changed into others, in which everything is affirmed, denied, confused as by a divinity in
Heraclitus.
delirium. Yes, that's what I was thinking. And I wouldn't have had that concept if I hadn't
Yes.
studied.
Yeah.
But is it, I'm assuming the rest of the book is like that. The rest of this story is like that too, but we didn't necessarily
All of
pick
them.
up on.
There's a
Sorry.
few. Oh, this story you mean?
Yeah. I meant like in this story, all these references that I didn't get, I assumed they were similar to this. I was like, yeah, I wrote it down: a Heraclitean flux, a library of contradictions. But I wouldn't have had that if I didn't have the first few lectures of the history of
Yeah.
philosophy.
I think over time you get used to just seeing the philosophical idea, even
Yeah.
if you don't know who originated it. And
Yeah.
I still want to look at that. I see that's chaos, that's insanity, that's contradiction, that's non-identity. I mean, I don't need to know Heraclitus, but
Right.
Heraclitus makes it easier to understand this. But it gives you a way to realize that ideas can become, can result in real actions.